hemi Schuster tōku ingoa, no konei no ngai tūhaurangi, e Ngāti wāhia, Ngāti Hinemihi hoki, te tahi atu taha tōku no Ngāti Tarawhai. Ko te kōrero o tēnei whare, he kōrero mō Ngāti Tūhau, Ngāti Hinemihi, mō Ngāti Tarawhai, mō tūhaurangi hoki.
Jim Schuster's mother was renowned weaver Emily Schuster. She was the niece of rangitiaria Denon, known as Guide Rangi. Guide Rangi was the granddaughter of Tene Waitere. There are 4 whare named Hinemihi. The series focuses on the first whare, now in England, but you may hear about the others in the series. For context, Jim explains.
Ko te Hinemihi tuatahi kei Ingarangi. Ko te mea tuarua kei Taumarunui, kei te taha o te awa o Taringa Motu. There's a Hinemihi down there, and then there's this Hinemihi, te Tuatoru, and then there's a 4th Hinemihi down at Ngāpuna.
Yes, I've been to that one.
Yeah.
And so why 4 whare, just to...
I don't know, that's just how the mana of Hinemihi herself. I think you rarely get a Te Aroa whare with the name of a woman on them. Most of them are after males, and the wharekai bears the name of the woman. But here, this is Hinemihi's got 4 wharenuis named after her. Same, well, as far as we know, the same Hinemihi named after that tupuna.
Now this whare that we are sitting in, also named Hinemihi, Hinemihi Te Tuatoru, is located on the corner of Old Taupo Road. Now it's a busy part of town, cars heading towards the main Taupo Highway. The rumble of logging trucks can be heard. About 100 metres further down is the tourist spot Te Puia, well known for its ngāwha, hot springs and bubbling geysers. Now, there are photos displayed on the walls. It's a bit of a time capsule. There's magazines and pictures that allude to the rich history of guiding in Te Aroa. I can see, of course, Guide Rangi Makareti Papakura, who is famously...
Makareti was Rangitiria's mother-in-law. Rangi eventually married this man here. He was Denon. He was William Denon, and he was the son of Makareti. And this is how Kraua Tene Waitere, who carved that Hinemihi, this Hinemihi, and the Hinemihi down at Ngāpuna. So that's our strong connection, our tie to Hinemihi, the whareas, through our Kraua, and that's him up there on the wall. This was one of the last works he carved. But that monument outside, he died in... He was 77 when he died in 1931. But, that's a younger picture of him up the top. That's his wife, Ruihi, and his daughter, Tuhipo.
Tene was young when he assisted Wero Tāroi in carving Hinemihi Te Ao Tawhito. How old would he have been then?
He was about 27, 20... He was born in 1854. Hinemihi was opened in 1881. So he worked alongside Wero. Wero was one of the tohunga whakairo of Ngāti Tarawhai at the time. But he was in his old age. And Tene was protege. Like his student.
Student, yeah.
Wero died while they were carving Hinemihi. So Tene had to finish it off. So he finished it, and then it was opened 1881. 5 years later, it was dumped on by the eruption.
Yes.
It had only been up for 5 years when the eruption happened, so it got buried. But the thing about that Hinemihi, there's a picture of it over there up there.
Yep.
It's, I guess it's special to us, that whare, because it saved a lot of people. If it wasn't for that house, I wouldn't be here. Well, none of those people up there would have been here. Yeah, we owe our lives to that whare.
On the night of the Tarawera eruption, June the 10th, 1886, Tene also sought refuge inside Hinemihi.
And he was in there on the night. He was there, staying there. They were visiting his wife's sister was there. Had come to visit them, and they sheltered in Hinemihi on the night of the eruption. The next day they moved down, and they were given land down at Ngāpuna, so they went there, where that Hinemihi down there stands.
Now, there is a rich whakapapa to Hinemihi. We'll hear more about that soon. The whare opened at Te Wairoa in early 1881. Just 5 years later, in 1886, the Tarawera eruption occurred. The then Earl of Onslow, William Hillier, had come to the end of his tenure as Governor-General, and he wanted a memento.
Like all those British colonials did, and he paid £50 for it.
Yeah.
And those carvings were all taken off the building, and Mika Aporo, who took all the carvings then on a cart up to... It went away really as a consignment of 23 carvings. It didn't take the whole house. The rest of it just fell down up there. But the carvings, 23 carvings that went, Onslow shipped them over there, and they were erected in his park, in his Clandon Park, where his home was. The whare, they built a structure for it. They weren't to know. They didn't know where they went. So some of them were around the wrong way. I think, like, for instance, that Po Tahuhu there.
Yes.
In this whare, this Hinemihi, it faces inwards. On their one, they had it facing outwards, out that way. But they didn't know, you see. They weren't to know how it was. And it had an open wall there. There was no wall, so that was holding they used it as a boat shed.
And it also survived cold winters and was even used as a dollhouse. But there's a nice story. In 1917, during World War I, the Māori Pioneer Battalion, who stayed at Clandon House when it was used as a military hospital, noticed that things weren't quite right in the whare. They see the carvings and they corrected it.
Yeah. It had, and then it was moved later at another time.
Alan Gallop wrote the book The House with the Golden Eyes, the name taken by the fact that the carvings had gold sovereign coins as the eyes instead of paua shell.
He's a Pākehā, he's an Englishman. He came out here, and he first met Hinemihi with my mum when she went across in about 1986. They were a haka group, and she was demonstrating weaving. They had carvers in the group, and he was selected by New Zealand Government Tourist Bureau, who had an office in London, and Alan Gallop was given the job of taking these people around London, around England, to the various places they had to go visit. And then my mum asked him, we've got a whare over here, we want to go and see it. And he took them down to, well, he didn't even know it existed, but he found out all about it. And so that book of his, Hinemihi, The House with the Golden Eyes, was all about his experience of meeting Hinemihi the first time, because he was taking the group across the lawn of Clandon House.
Yeah, I can imagine it.
To this whare, and he wondered why they were all crying, wailing, going across to the whare, all karanga ki te whare.
Alan Gallop joins us from his home via Zoom in Ashford, England.
Thank you so much, Alan Gallop. Could we start off maybe if you'd like to tell us a bit about yourself?
Well, I'm now 73, much to my surprise. I was born to the west of London in a town called Staines, which is on the River Thames. And we left there when I was 11 to move to the town next to it, where I still live. It's called Ashford, and we're in the county of Surrey, which is quite a pretty county. Some nice rivers run through it, and stately homes, etc., including Clandon Park, of course.
When he left school, he trained as a journalist and worked at a news agency based at Heathrow Airport.
And I stayed there 12 years. because I thought now was a good time to go into public relations. So I did that. In 1983, I started my own PR company, and we represented airlines and tourism offices, including Tourism New Zealand, or the New Zealand Tourism Board, as it was called in those days. And I loved the work, absolutely loved it. I really did, and we ran that company for 20 years because I wanted to write books. And to do that, you need to find time for yourself to write them.
Alan came to know about Hinemihi in the mid-1980s. A kapahaka concert group from the Māori Arts and Crafts Institute travelled to England. As Jim Schuster mentioned, Alan was charged in showing the group around and basically looking after them. Emily Schuster was also there.
She said, Alan, have you ever heard of a place called Clarendon Park? And I'd vaguely heard of it, but I'd never been there. She said, well, in the grounds is a Maori meeting house. I said, really? What's a Maori meeting house? Shows you how ignorant I was in those days, She said, yes, it's there. And I would like you to call an organisation called the National Trust that runs the place and ask if we can go and visit the house. I phoned them up and I said, oh, hello, I'm calling on behalf of the New Zealand Tourism Board. Have you got a property called Clarendon Park? And the lady on the other end of the phone said, oh, yes. I said, and if by chance at Clarendon Park there's a Maori meeting house? She said, oh, hang on a minute, I'll just ask. And she came back on. She said, oh, yes, we've got one of those here. Yes, definitely. I said, well, I'd like to bring 30 Maori people to visit it. Oh, hang on. I need to ask permission. I'll call you back. Well, she called me back about 4 hours later. And she said, yes, it's all right. Yes, you can come. When do you want to do it? So I said, Friday week. We're performing in Guildford that night. And Clarendon Park is very close to the city of Guildford. So that's what we did. But she suggested that myself and my colleague got there about 9:30 to get the key to the meeting house, because when it's not being used, it's always shut. She said, go inside and have a look. So we walked across this huge, great lawn that they've got there. And there's this little wooden house of the type that I'd never seen before, and put the key in the door, opened it, went inside. And I was quite stunned by the carvings that were in there. There was no electricity at all, so we couldn't turn on any light. So we left the door open, and there's a window as well that lets some light in, And we thought, all right, well, we'll close the door behind us and we'll go and meet the coach. But on this particular day, as they got off the coach in their formal attire, they were very serious. I said, well, Hinemihi is just across here. Let's go. So we crossed the grass, and we would have been about 200 yards away from Hinemihi. Emily encouraged us all to stand as a group and then slowly walk behind her towards Hinemihi. And then I was really shocked, because she started to call to the building, and then halfway across the lawn, she stopped and she called again. And as we grew near it, I could tell that quite a lot of the people, the men and the women, were crying. I thought, oh dear, what have we done here, to upset these folks, And then the door opened. There was nobody in the building. I had closed it properly, and I was quite shocked. In fact, I was a little bit frightened, I must admit, But nobody else seemed to be afraid, so they all went inside the building. Now, I hadn't been asked to go inside with them, and I thought, well, this is a very private thing, so I won't go in. So they all went in and they closed the door behind them, came out again about 20 minutes later, and they were just coming out of the building. And I said to Emily, everything all right? She said, oh, yeah, everything's more than all right. It's fantastic. I said, but you're crying. She said, well, what you need to realise is that all of us in this group can trace our ancestors to Hinemihi. And she said, because this was the house in which people had sheltered during the Tarawera eruption, she said, by moving around inside and feeling the carvings, we could hear their screams, we could hear their pain, which made this house very, very special, because everybody who sheltered inside it during the Tarawera eruption survived.
This waiata performed by Te Kapa o Ngāti Tarawhai, composed by Uenuku Whehall. The words, Ka toro ake nā ringaringa, hārua ai I kāho nei, kai roto nā koe I te hine pauri, kai roto nā koe, e kui e, Hinemihi e. My hands reach up to lightly touch the shipping container. Are you there in the dark? Are you in there? Kui Hinemihi. The song is about the plight of Hinemihi and a call for her people to rise up and return her home. And that's the role of the group Ngā Kohinga Whakairo o Hinemihi.
Ko Karanti taku ingoa, ko au te uri o Aporo te Wharikaniwha, te uri o Hinemihi. I tipu ake au I konei ki rotorua nui a kahumata mo moe. Ko au te kaiarahi I te kauhi whakairo o Hinemihi, e tino honore, e tino humari a hau ki te tautoko me te mana ki roto I tēnei nui kaupapa, no reira, tēnara koutou.
A korua kiri whehola hau. Ko hau tētahi o ngā kaihoi te waka o ngā kohinga whakairo Hinemihi. I hail from Ngāti Tarawhai, Te Arawa Whānui, Ngāti Awa, Te Whakatohea, Ngai Tūhoi, in Te Whānau Āpanui. Nō reira, tēnā tātou.
Kia ora, tēnā koe, Ruakiri, kia ora rangitihi, kia ora.
Kia ora tātou, ko hau tēnei rangiti pene, ko mātou tokotoru nei, I heke mai a Aporo te Wharekaniwha, nō nā Hinemihi o Te Ao Tawhito, nānei whakarite kia whakatūria ai taua kuira. Ka mutu kai te whakakanohi mātou toko toru nei I te karangatanga I kia nei ko ngā kohinga whakairo o Hinemihi.
Hinemihi is largely about connection, tātai whakapapa. Rangitihi Pene explains.
Our ancestor Hinemihi, for whom the carvings now reside in England, she descends from a Ngāti Rangiti main ancestor. She married a tūharangi man called Te Karere. Her people were living first at Motutaua on Rotukaki. Then they shift around to Tokiniho, other parts like Karikaria, which is right at Lake Tarawera. And eventually arrived at that area at Lake Tarawera, a American evangelicist, a guy called Seymour Spencer. And his vision for Tuarangi as a whole, and I speak Tuarangi, not Tarawhai here, was that we would become farmers and agriculturalists. And so he moved his first church was on the main park, or Tarawera, which is on Lake Tarawera. He moved to a valley which was previously uninhabited, called Te Wairoa, beside the Te Wairoa stream. And it sits between the Green Lake, Rotorokaki, and Lake Tarawera. So he moved there and he sectioned off the area into fenceable farms, little farms, and he taught Tūharangi and Ngāti Hinemihi to be, farmers. And so that was the start of it. But a number of things happened, and the village Te Wairoa was abandoned at least twice. One was we had a falling out with our dear neighbours, Ngāti Rangiti, over the ownership of Rotomahana and the Pink and White Terraces. We had a 5-year war where we all went back to our war paths and abandoned Te Wairoa, because that tourist aspect was ramping up. And then in the 1860s, you'll know that the land wars were happening, and even though we were not involved, people were crisscrossing our territory, and it became dangerous. And so once again, Te Wairoa was abandoned, and everyone went back to their fortified paths for safety. But the golden era was from 1870 to 1886 for tourism. For tourism,
I was going to say, it was like a hub.
Yep. And so, you could trace the growth of tourism in New Zealand from that time and from Te Wairoa. The two tribes involved, Ngāti Hinemihi was involved through their chief Aporo. And Aporo built a hotel for the iwi. And he named it initially the Cascade. You see, it's got their terraces. And then he gave up on that name and called it the Rotomahana Hotel. There was a second hotel called the Terraces Hotel, and that was on land that was actually owned by a Pākehā, but on land leased by Tūharangi. So you have Tūharangi. And initially Tūharangi and Ngāti Hinemihi were competing tourist companies. In fact, it was so bad that they had to be mediated, and after the mediation occurred, and this was in early 1880s now, they became one tourist venture. And so because of the extreme amounts of money that Ngāti Hinemihi and Tūharangi were earning, Aporo decided to erect a wharenui, both for traditional reasons, tangihanga and hui, and also as a concert venue at night for the tourists who were coming, 30 or 40 a day, every day.
Tēnā koutou. We'll hear more from Rangitihi Pene, Colin Tihi, Ruakiri Fairhall, Alan Gallop and Jim Schuster in the series about Hinemihi Te Ao Tawhito. Next week.
I'm really excited that we're now at the stage where we're actually thinking of bringing her home.
I was speaking with Mark Adams, who I've known for some time, when I said to him, "Hey Mark, has your Hinemihi suite of images in its entirety been exhibited?" And he said no.
Dr. Kiri Ann Wikitera wrote her doctoral thesis, Māori Spaces in Foreign Places, Hinemihi Te Ao Tawhito, and Hamish Coney wrote the book Hinemihi Te Hokinga, The Return. They both feature in next week's episode. E kore e memeti ngā mihi kia tātou nei kai kōrero. E tika ana mā te kōrero ka puta te whakamāramatanga. That's the show for the week. For photos and more information, head to rnz.co.nz/Te Ahi Ka. You can also download the podcast RNZ Te Ahi Ka wherever you access your podcasts. Kia noho pai, kia noho haumaru, tēnā tātou katoa.